When I was 26 years old, I stood at the foot of my only aunt's bedside in Sloan Kettering Memorial Cancer Center in New York City, watching her and my father, a gastroenterologist with a great sense of humor, crack jokes and avoid talking about her death. She had widely metastatic breast cancer, and it had been unresponsive to the best treatments of the day. And she had such extensive disease throughout her spine that it was fracturing, rendering her almost paralyzed and in a great deal of pain. And I can see in retrospect that she was also suffering from a high degree of existential distress about the fact that she was young, 55, she was divorced, childless, living alone, and scared of dying. And I was struck by the train of experts that were filing in and filing out, addressing their piece of her problem, but failing to address the proverbial elephant in the room. The orthopedists had offered braces for her unstable spine. The pain team had offered to switch her OxyContin to IV Dilaudid. And the oncologists were insistent that she finish her final courses of radiation, although in hindsight, she only had a few weeks left to live. Nobody was talking about her dying or addressing any of her other fears. And this was the moment that, in spite of being a literature major and wanting to be a writer, I decided I was going to try to go to medical school, and why I eventually ended up specializing in hospice and palliative care. You see, I had inadvertently rubbed up against my own mortality the year prior while rehabbing from an injury. And I had decided then that if we're all going to die, and some deaths are somewhat predictable, then I wanted to be a part of that intimate conversation about helping one's death be as good and as meaningful as possible. There comes a moment in all of our lives when we become aware of our mortality. And for many of us, it begins with a childhood pet, the loss of that, or a loved one like my aunt. And at this moment, up to this moment, we might have had an abstract idea about death. But at that time, it becomes very real. And we learn a new truth that every human being, every living thing dies, that we will die. And then most of us, from a fairly early age in our culture, we watch the people around us turn away from that uncomfortable truth. We learn to look away. And in learning to look away from that reality of the finite truth of our lives, we actually miss out on a lot of living, because it separates us from ourselves and those we love when we tell ourselves that we'll always have more time, that there'll always be a second chance, that we can put off our dreams and vacations and opportunities to spend time with the people we love when we're less busy. One of my favorite contemporary musicians, Passenger, has a line in his simple song that says, "The time goes slow, but it's always running out." And we have a really hard time coming to terms with this, that every day that we're alive, our time is ever shorter, and we're one step closer to our death. Over the past decade, I have cared for many elderly people who've lived with serious chronic illness for years, sometimes decades, be surprised that they are dying, because we learn to look away. Now, human beings have been simultaneously avoiding looking at the fact that we're going to die and then asking ourselves, why do we do that, for eons? And you can think about our fear of death as a natural, self-preserving instinct that in our culture has just gotten kicked into overdrive. And there's a lot of theories about this. One of the more contemporary ones is actually called terror management theory. And this says that basically upon learning that we will die and having little to no control over that, it causes such deep terror inside of us that we spend the rest of our lives engaged in activities that allow us to ignore or avoid our imminent death. And we look for answers in things like religion, philosophy. We create things that will outlast us, and we devote a lot of time to long-term legacy projects like our families. So a lot of us also don't want to look at dying because we love deeply. And we can't bear the thought that we might be the source of suffering for our loved ones with our own deaths, or look at the fact that we might suffer terribly ourselves when those we love leave us, especially if they're our children. So, it's true, though, that some of the most magnificent things that human beings have done, we do actually in spite of our mortality. Because if you think about it, we will devote years of our lives to important projects, and we'll take physical and creative risks precisely because we feel that time cannot touch us. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying don't ever waste time, because one of the true pleasures of being an adult in our world is being in charge of how you spend or waste your time. For example, in my line of work, you might imagine, I appreciate a good sense of humor, and I like to stay up some nights late and watch Saturday Night Live reruns. But I sure have a lot more fun when I do it with people I love than alone. The risk of avoiding looking at our mortality regularly is that it actually encourages us to fritter our time away on things that, if we step back and thought about it, don't matter much. And right now, I'm going to harp on one thing, and you all know why. I'm talking about that dazed and hazy time travel that we're doing on the internet and social media websites that are robbing hours and hours of chronically distracted time from us. And all of us most of us here anyway, are participating in some form of this. I'd like to see out there in the audience a show of hands, mine included, if you've gone down some late night rabbit hole on the internet and gotten lost, and then surfaced hours later to find hours and hours of time have just disappeared. Yeah? You know, I wonder what it would be like if we had an app on our phones that actually could tell us how much of our lifetime have been used up sitting in front of a screen. Because if you go to your phone's screen time log and you look at that, some days it's pretty disturbing and eye-opening how much time we spend there. How many of you have read or seen the movie The Princess Bride? Yeah. Can you remember Christopher Guest's hilarious villain, Count Tyrone, the six-fingered guy? Yeah, well, if you can recall, his torture machine is exactly this, sucking years of your life away. And I don't know if you remember his screams, but I remember his whimper. And I wonder, what would it be like if we traded some of those late-night internet binges for a pillow and a blanket, and we walked outside under the stars? I have a confession, though, to make as a hospice physician who spent a lot of time with people who've died in places like the ICU, the oncology wards, nursing homes, and in their own homes, that even I have a hard time looking at this truth. And I find myself wanting to believe crazy things like I'll be youngish forever, that my children will always be somewhere close by for me to enjoy, that my health will stay relatively good right up to that moment where I die quickly and fairly painlessly from some unavoidable injury. Now, this is despite all evidence to the contrary, right? In my role, I have often been the bearer of bad news, and I've sat with many people who talk about the things that they regret as they approach the end of their life. And still, even I have avoided going to see a friend or two when they were facing their own death, telling myself I'd have another week or another year, even though another week, even though I know better than most not to do that. And in fact, my own looking away has been so curious and instructive to me about how powerful this desire is to avoid this truth, even by those of us who should, in theory, be the very best at facing it. I will tell you that some of the nurses, doctors, and hospice staff with whom I've worked have also had a hard time facing mortality when it was not someone else's. So for all of us, 3 things. And the first one is this. Every time you find yourself picking up your phone or your computer in sort of a distracted way, I want you to pause. And I want you to ask yourself this question. If my time is shorter than I would like it to be, and believe me, I see so many people who end up having a lot less time than they hope for. If my time is short, is this the way I want to be spending it? Or is there something I could do right now that would really enliven me? Because if there is and you can, then go do it. And if there's someone else that you'd rather be spending time with, then go find them, or at least call them and tell them so. I always feel better when I put down my phone and I go find my kids. Lastly, if there's other work that you dream to do, then start looking at that on the internet. Let technology be our tool, but not some spurious master. Second, go sign up this year to volunteer for hospice. Go learn to sit at the bedside with people and families who are facing death right now. Learn to be of service to them in a way that helps you drop out of your own life and your own preoccupations for a few hours a week and into someone else's reality. A reality that will someday be yours and mine. When we learn to practice sitting at the bedside with a stranger, something interesting happens. We start to practice facing death. And by practicing with a stranger, we're able to practice being present for those that we're more complicatedly connected to, like our families, our friends, and even ourselves. We go sit in a room where death is waiting. And we don't try to run away. We don't try to distract ourselves. We practice not turning away. And we can actually learn to trade our fear for curiosity. We can become a beneficent witness, and this is something that we rarely experience or do for another human, and yet it's one of our greatest gifts that we have to offer someone. Our open-hearted presence, our time. Learning to be curious about what happens to another human being when they approach the end of their life, and what happens to their mind, their body, and their soul, that's a gift. Think about it like a path through the woods. Other people have walked this way before. Learn from it. Because the secret gift in sidling up to death in this fashion is that it helps you learn to savor the sweetness of your own life a bit better. Just go ask any hospice volunteer, and they'll tell you that sunsets and time with their friends are a lot more sacred. And perhaps there's another beneficial side effect that will surprise you. Because if we've spent a lifetime learning to look away from big death with a capital D, we've unfortunately unconsciously trained ourselves to look away from other big uncomfortable truths around us. And I'm talking about poverty, abuses of power, race, and gender, and the way our small daily actions and choices add up to the enormity of global climate change and environmental disaster. So perhaps if we can face our mortality with a little less discomfort and a little more truth, we can actually start to train ourselves to turn towards small, doable, daily change. Because ultimately, changing our habits could mean everything. Lastly, I want you to spend some time this summer daydreaming a little bit about your own death. And you can tell by now that I'm not kidding. So let it be a perfect summer day for you, however that is that you define it, when you're feeling relaxed and appreciating your life. And then I want you to start to visualize your own death, much in the way that an athlete learns to practice certain moves in their mind. Brain research has showed us that this is one way that our body and our mind learn. And why would I have you do this? Because learning to visualize and look at your death actually can help you see what's most important to your life. When we actually lean in and accept the fact that our time is fleeting and precious, it can become a lot more juicy, and then we're a lot less willing to waste it. It's okay if you idealize your death in your mind when you're visualizing it. You may not get that death exactly, but knowing what's important to you is really valuable because some part of you will unconsciously turn towards that. And that can help you make decisions along the way that will help you get more of the death that you would hope for. And if you tell the people that you love what you hope for, then they can help you get more of that too, if when it becomes your time, you're unable to speak for yourself. Believe me, I have seen many deaths that have been so beautiful and peaceful that they're a gift to every single person in that room. My loved ones are here in the room. And when I visualize my own death, I'm on a bed that has been wheeled out on my patio, and my husband and my children are there, and my dog with her big soft head is lying at my feet. I can hear the sound of water and birds in the trees, and I can see the wind moving through the aspens, quaking, and then blowing up in the pines. And I can see that huge blue bowl of the sky above me starting to shimmer in the twilight, and I'm as mesmerized by that as I have ever been. And then I'm moving out into that wild and vast unknown. When you think back on my talk, I want you to think about how you can turn more genuinely towards the people you love and your life. I want you to be able to use all this talking and thinking about dying as fuel for a way to live your life such that when it's your time, you have as few of regrets as possible, knowing that it's really normal for all of us to have a few. Everybody here already knows that their time and not their money is their most precious resource. And I promise you, as a hospice doctor, that's true. Nobody really wants more money at the end of their life. They want more time. And it's not more time on a screen. In fact, they want that time back. So, people want more time to feel deeply loved and connected with the people they love and the places they love, period. And if you want that too, and I want it for you, for all of us, then I suggest we put down our phones a little bit more often, do a little daydreaming about your death, and then go sign up to volunteer for hospice, because it just might help you make the most of the time that you have left. Thanks.